Look at this image. A German soldier from World War II in the 1960s in Africa fighting a communist insurgency, notably with a first-class Iron Cross displayed on his uniform. Yeah, if you think you've seen it all, the war room comes along and surprises you once again. Siegfried Friedrich Heinrich Müller, also known as Congo Müller, was born in eastern Germany in the city of Crossen an der Oder on October 26, 1920. He came from a Prussian family with a military tradition that went back several generations. His father had fought as a lieutenant in World War I and in World War II returned to the front lines as a lieutenant colonel, and he was killed in action in the Soviet Union. When the Third Reich was established in 1933, Siegfried was 13 years old. He joined youth associations, first the Jungvolk, and then in 1935 the Hitlerjugend, or Hitler Youth, in these associations. Then he became a section leader, meaning he was one of the most dedicated and prominent members. At 18 years old, he was then redirected to the Reich Labor Service, the Reichsarbeitsdienst, where he spent 6 months working on infrastructure projects throughout the country. In 1939, he was drafted into military service and had his baptism by fire there in Poland, although, according to Siegfried Müller's own memoirs, he didn't see much action in that Polish campaign. No, he also fought in 1940 in France. But really, World War II, according to his own words, would only truly begin for him on June 22, 1941, when he took part in Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. And for the next 4 years, Siegfried Müller became a true frontline veteran of the German infantry, fighting the Red Army in several battles. He was awarded the Silver Wound Badge for multiple injuries to his body, as well as for being wounded twice. Classes of the Iron Cross, the medal he famously began to wear on the left pocket of his uniform. Decades later, in 1943, after attending officer school, he was promoted to lieutenant or second lieutenant and received his promotion to first lieutenant on April 20, 1945. At that time, his unit was isolated from the rest of the German army in the so-called Courland Pocket, completely surrounded by the Soviet army. But he was wounded in the back, a bullet lodged near his spine, and he was then evacuated to Germany, ending up in a hospital in Frankfurt. And it was there, in Frankfurt, that his troops surrendered to the Americans. At the end of the war, Siegfried Müller ended up being released from American captivity in 1947. The same year that the first major crisis of the Cold War began there, in Berlin, the so-called Berlin Airlift. And to carry out infrastructure works in West Berlin, the Americans created a unit called the Civilian Labor Group, which employed several former military personnel. But since West Germany didn't have armed forces at the time, all these people were civilians wearing American uniforms. Siegfried Müller was then made a lieutenant in the security units of the Civilian Labor Group, which today is considered a paramilitary unit of West Germany, which predates the creation of the Bundeswehr, right? The new military units of West Germany. Created in 1956 when the Bundeswehr was finally authorized to operate. That year, however, Siegfried Müller was rejected by the new command of the force and did not become part of the new German army. This led him then to look for work abroad for the first time, and he was hired by BP, by British Petroleum, which at that time was conducting several oil well explorations in North Africa, in Libya. And there, Siegfried Müller got a job digging up mines that had been placed by the former Africa Corps during the World War II. He worked for several years in the Sahara for BP, and later in the early 1960s, he returned to West Germany. And it was during this time that a very significant event in African history ended up crossing paths with his own life story. Because in 1960, Belgium quickly and suddenly granted independence to its only, but very important African colony, the Congo. And this rapid transfer of power from the Belgians to the local Congolese leaders caused the country to quickly plunge into a series of crises that became known as the Congo crisis. A first major stage of this Congo crisis was the Katanga Secession crisis. Katanga is a province in the south of the former Belgian Congo, which was very rich in minerals. There you find the Katanga Mining Association, which even controls several uranium mines, right? Uranium. The uranium ore there is considered the best or among the best in the world, and which the Manhattan Project made extensive use of for building the first atomic bombs in World War II. Well, the leader of this Katanga secession, Moise Morachombe, had the support of only a few African countries for his movement. One of them was South Africa, where he was living and working. At that time, former general of the Afrika Korps, Friedrich von Mellenthin, suggested to the leadership of Katanga, to Moise Tshombe, the use of European mercenaries to reinforce his troops. That's how some of Moise Tshombe's agents ended up contacting Siegfried Müller in West Germany and convinced him to move to South Africa. In 1962, but when Müller finally arrived in the country, the fighting in Katanga had basically already ceased. Because Operation Grand Slam, which used a UN peacekeeping force, one of the first peacekeeping forces established by the UN, managed to defeat the Katanga secessionist rebels and ended the crisis in January 1963. Müller then, with nothing else to do, ended up becoming a hotel manager at a hotel in South Africa that also had a bar. And, in his own words, he said he took the job because he really liked booze. But in that same year, a new rebellion would break out in northeastern Congo, called the Simba Rebellion. Simba means lion in the local dialect, and these new rebels had communist-oriented leadership, which ended up receiving several Soviet and Cuban advisors to support their cause. And their cause was precisely the creation of a People's Republic of the Congo in this northeastern area of the former Belgian colony of Congo, with its capital in Stanleyville. These Simba rebels were extremely violent. I can't describe in a few words just how violent they really were. The barbarism practiced by these people is beyond anything I've ever read about in Africa, right? There were dismemberments, beheadings, mass rapes, every kind of possible murder committed by these tribal warriors. They believed that a kind of magic ran through their bodies, making them immune to bullets from firearms. Well, the authorities in the capital, Leopoldville, especially the army commander, General José Désiré Mobutu, found themselves powerless to contain the rebels. So Mobutu brings Moise Tshombe back from exile, since he was exiled at that time. There in Spain, he returns from exile to take command of the country in order to defeat the rebels. Tshombe then returns to Congo and takes power as prime minister. And immediately he implements a strategy based on the use of a unit of white mercenaries. Tshombe made this decision because he had already relied on a unit of white mercenaries during the Katanga secession. And what about this unit? Commando 4 was commanded by a British officer named Thomas Michael. Mad Mike Hoare was born in India, the son of an Irish couple. In 1917, he joined the British Army and fought the Japanese in the Burma campaign during the World War II, including the bloody and decisive Battle of Imphal. With the end of World War II, he would immigrate to South Africa, right, to live on a continent he considered the most likely for new adventures. And he really embarks on a series of adventures. At a certain point, he sails across the entire Mediterranean in a sailboat, but he quickly gives up and also loses his enthusiasm. With that, he returns to the continent and opens a safari company, making various contacts with African and European political and financial authorities at that time. And that's exactly how he was hired by Moise Tshombe. And he was hired to command Commando 4 during the revolution, there in Katanga, and this time to defeat the Simba revolution. Mad Mike Hoare takes command of Commando 5, a mercenary unit of 311 men from South Africa, Rhodesia, Belgium, England, Ireland, and also Germany. These 300 men would act as the vanguard of a Congolese army troop and had support from the CIA. Is that exactly what comes to mind when you think of the Katanga Revolution? Mad Mike Hoare fought against the UN forces, and the following year, he started fighting with the support of the United States to defeat a communist revolution in the heart of Africa, and of the German mercenaries of Mad Mike Hoare, Siegfried Müller, who, at 44 years old, was the oldest of all the mercenaries in the group. Lieutenant Müller arrives at the front line on August 21, 1964, and on the following day, he is already involved in his first action against the city of Albertville, now called Kalimi, on the shores of Lake Tanganyika. This city was a stronghold of the Simba resistance in that area, and Mad Mike Hoare's mercenaries used boats provided by the CIA to flank the city by the lake and capture it. On that date, Müller manages to take the city, killing dozens of guerrillas, but he faces a stalemate in his attempt to take the local airport. However, a few days later, he succeeds and takes the airport, and then his reputation grows significantly within the mercenary group, leading Mad Mike Hoare to promote him to captain and gives him command of a sub-unit known as Commando 52, made up of 60 men with the support of 150 Congolese soldiers. Now, Captain Müller was tasked with taking the city of Boende, the nerve center of the Simba defenses, located in the heart of enemy territory. However, due to the difficulties with the Congo's infrastructure network, in fact, Müller's force had to depart from Coquelhatville, which is 600 kilometers west of Bonde, and it was from that city, now known as Bandaka, that he set out with his armed column toward the enemy fortress. And it was on that 600-kilometer journey that Siegfried Müller's troops cleared the way, using extreme violence against the guerrillas, including people who had surrendered, who should have been treated as prisoners of war. Both the mercenary command and the Congolese government turned a blind eye to these actions by Siegfried Müller. And when he finally reached the fortress of Bonde, on October 19th, he faced a very large force that ended up preventing the capture of the place. Müller needed a few days to reorganize his position, and during this interval, he started being followed by reporters from several countries. These journalists then conducted several interviews with this figure, whom they considered quite exotic, who wore an iron cross on his chest, still the original with the swastika, not the denazified 1957 version, and who led an extremely violent guerrilla group, which even decorated their jeeps with the skulls of dead enemies. Already nicknamed by the press as Congo Müller, his image spread around the world and divided opinions in 1964. The fact is that on October 24th, 5 days after his first attempt, he finally takes Bonde and dismantles all the Simba resistance in that province, which would fall into the hands of the government the following month. As a reward for his success, Mad Mike Hoare promotes Siegfried Müller again, this time to the rank of major, and removes him from the front line to the planning team for actions against the enemy capital in Stanleyville. However, Müller, for reasons still unclear, ends up leaving Mad Mike Hoare's Commando 5 at the beginning of 1965. He returns to South Africa. The Simba Revolution ends up being crushed in November of that same year, 1965. Thus, the opportunities for mercenary troop employment in the country came to an end. And, interestingly, one of the Simba rebels' military advisors, it was Ernesto Che Guevara, who had one of the first defeats of his career there in the Congo. And there in South Africa, Siegfried Müller now thinks about going to Vietnam to work as a mercenary in the war that was starting in the Asian country. But this plan of his, in fact, never worked out. And there in East Germany, his image at that time was hated by the government, which even said he was an icon of counterculture. In a news report, even comparing Congo Müller to the Rolling Stones. And that's why East Germany sent an intelligence team disguised as journalists who managed to lure Siegfried Müller in 1966 for an interview, getting him drunk and making him say the most unspeakable things possible in front of the cameras. Müller's interview lasts more than an hour, and he speaks without any shame about the kind of actions he carried out there in the Congo. And throughout the entire interview, he can't hold back his smile for even a minute. He keeps that smile the whole time, which made the production become known as The Smiling Man, Confessions of a Killer. And East Germany promoted this film worldwide as a criticism of the government of West Germany itself. And after achieving this dubious fame that the documentary gave him, Siegfried Müller decided to remain in South Africa, living a quieter life. He got a job as an employee at a security company in Johannesburg, got married, had a daughter, and passed away on April 17, 1983, at the age of 62, a victim of stomach cancer. But in 1978, a production called The Wild Geese was released, known in Brazil as Selvagens Cães de Guerra, and it was inspired by the team of mercenaries led by Mad Mike Hoare. During the Simba Revolution in Congo in 1964, the production features big names like Richard Burton, Roger Moore, and Richard Harris, who are part of the team of mercenaries in the film. A character named Lieutenant Peter Kutzi, played by a German actor named Hard Kruger, even though the character Lieutenant Kutzi is South African, a Boer. To this day, there is still debate about how much this character was based on Congo Müller, and as a final curiosity, the actor Hard Kruger actually fought in World War II in the last months of the war, in 1945, as a soldier in the Waffen-SS. Now tell me, did you already know the story of Siegfried Müller, Congo Müller, the former Wehrmacht soldier who became a mercenary in Africa in the 60s, wearing an iron cross on his chest? Tell us in the comments, and if you like learning about military history topics, of course, you can't miss our course on the Luftwaffe from the first to the last day. Go check out our syllabus and enroll by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. If you like this video, then share it with your friends, but also give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to War Room so you don't miss anything else. I'll stop here. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from War Room.